Peace and blessings, and welcome to another edition of the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. I am your host, Kim Martin Raymond. I am a minister, I'm a spiritual life coach, an author, and the founder of Redefining You LLC, where I help my clients to realign themselves, mind, body, and spirit. Tonight is going to be a special show, and the show is talking about taking care of our families, taking care of our loved ones, making sure that we are doing the proper planning that is necessary. So our show is entitled Estate Planning in the Now. And I'm excited about my guest. He is a dear friend of mine. He is a man of faith. He and I go way back, and it's just wonderful to have him here. And as is customary in the How Now podcast, I'm going to have him introduce himself at this time.
Well, first, thank you, Kim, for having me. This is a blessing to be here with you in particular, because you have the right energy. This is just a perfect show for you. So I'm honored to be on here. Everyone, my name is Keith Miles. I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney. Originally from New York, came down to Georgia about 2004, and so now I can't say I'm an official Southerner, but I've been here long enough that I'm not a New Yorker, so I would just leave it at that, right? Right. But I have a practice, sole practice, and I have an office in Gwinnett and in Atlanta, and I focus on trying to help people, like Kim said, get your affairs in order, and we'll talk about what that means. But I just kind of look at it partially as my job, partially as my ministry. I'm not in an official position, but this is kind of, for me, what God's purpose is for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, it is a pleasure to have you here. I have watched you expand your business, and it's just been wonderful to see how God is continuing to work in and through you in this ministry of estate planning. And that's something that's so important, especially in this time of pandemic. We've seen a lot of people who have lost loved ones, and it's been abrupt. No one expected this. No one anticipated this. So before we dive into that, let's talk about what was going on prior to the pandemic. As far as your estate planning business, how are things looking for you? Were things going relatively, well, or, what seemed to be the things that people were most interested in when you started really expanding on your business?
Yeah, it was, I would say, steady, but a struggle. And the thing with estate planning, as you can imagine, it's a big procrastination issue. So people will say, oh, I know I need to do that. And then they don't want to take action, or they'll start and they won't finish. They'll even pay money and start the process and still not finish. It's just an uncomfortable thing to talk about, or they just want to rush through it and I just want to get something simple and just kind of want to just basically get a document. And we're like, no, you gotta kind of invest in it. So it's always hard. It was kind of like pulling teeth always to kind of get someone to do something and pushing and prodding, and so it was very exhausting. And so it's kind of like it's always going to be. So that was the way it was, and like you kind of leading into. It changed last year.
Yeah.
In a big way.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I know that it's prevalent also in the African American community. People just don't like it's another one of those taboo kind of situations. You don't want to talk about it, because you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to bring it up. You don't want to, But how many arguments? How many fights? How many things have we seen take place when people haven't left instructions on what it is that they want to be done, either to them, to themselves, what they want done with their belongings? These things are important, and we really put our families, I think, at a disadvantage when we don't step in and say the things that we want, what our wishes are for when we pass. And so, just like you're saying, I know it's an extremely taboo thing, but just like you said, it's not something that we rush through. It's something that we definitely need to put a foot forward in. And so let's fast forward to March of or January of 2020. What happened then?
Well, I would say the floodgates open, right? And it's not in a morbid sense where people are coming for probate and someone passed away.
Right.
I actually expected that to happen. I thought, okay, people gonna come, someone passed from COVID, and I need to. That actually wasn't what people were coming for. I actually never, even to this point, I have not had someone come to me who specifically said someone passed from COVID. Now, I had people pass, but maybe from other, old age or some heart attack or whatever. The typical stuff, right?
Right.
But what people did come starting it is that anxiety, right? Because before everyone knows you're gonna pass away. But in your mind, it's somewhere way down the road. Or if it's not way down, maybe it's 5-10 years. I don't need to do it right now. But what happened in 2020 was people started really having anxiety like, whoa, I don't know what this thing is going to be. I need to do it right now. And that's what your title, your pocket, in the now. Like that was like, they were like, I need to do this right now, because in my mind, it was always a topic. I'm also speaking of them. In my mind, it's always something that's coming. I'll eventually have to deal with. And now it's kind of when you see, how it was last year. It was just constant media. So this has happened. These are the numbers, right? Every day you're checking the numbers. More infections, more cases, this and that. So now we had people who were like, "Whoa, this is a real possibility." Even if I don't know anyone personally who's had this happen. Right, we're scared at that point to go outside. We're scared to go to the supermarket. Like it was to the point where people were really just scared. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I was one of them.
Oh yeah.
And that's gonna lead into what we talk about, later, is how I've dealt with it, because I'm an estate planning attorney, so I have to have a certain role with people. But I'm having the same anxiety and fears for myself. I can always, of course, do my own paperwork, right? So that helps. So I can get my own stuff, right? So I have my stuff in order, but still that anxiety, I understood why they were feeling the way they were feeling, because I was feeling the same way.
Right. And I mean, that's definitely an issue because, like you said, it just came up all of a sudden. And I'm surprised that you said that, there weren't people who were saying that there was a relative who passed of COVID. How do I do go through the probate? And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as well, just so that people are familiar with that. But when people first come to you and they're talking about estate planning, or what is the verbiage that people usually use? Because I wasn't really familiar with the term estate planning. When I think of estate planning, I think of these, super wealthy people that have all of these things and all of this property, and they have to go through all of that. Explain to us in layman's terms kind of what estate planning is, or what is the terminology that you hear people use when they refer to that?
Right. Well, I think you hit right on it. Is people think of they equate estate planning with wealth, so it's necessarily in their mind a lot of times monetarily based. So the layperson's thinking, I don't have enough. That's what I hear. Well, I really don't have that much.
Right.
Or you know what? It's simple. Like that's the other thing we hear. My thing is really simple. I don't have that much. They kind of combine those two statements. It's simple. I don't have that much.
Yes.
So those are the usual two things that we have to worry about, trying to explain really what's involved in estate planning, because an estate is a creation by the state. It's not a federal concept. So that's we want to be clear to. People think of the IRS a lot with taxes, so that's uniform. Your 1040, right? So whether you live in California, New York, Chicago, everyone's paying the 1040. But even though you all pass, you could pass away in any state, but each state has its own scheme. So Georgia has its own scheme. If someone moves to another state, I'm licensed in North Carolina, completely different scheme. So estates are created by the state for your possessions.
Okay.
Of course, if you have not already identified how they're going to pass. So if you have a house in your name, bank account in your name, car in your name, those things need to pass to someone else. But the only way to pass title is with the state doing it, because you didn't you pass away before you were able to do it yourself, right? So that's one function of probate, is to pass title to things. The other part of probate is for people. So you have, most of the time, as a parent particularly, you have a steward over someone, a child, right? A minor child. So that's the big thing we talk to people about, is property and people. It's the big thing. Even if you don't have a lot of money, you have children, yeah, well, then you need to do some estate planning, because you need to decide, if something happens to me and my child's 9 years old, who do you want to take care of him or her? That's probably more important where your property goes, right? So it's not just a property issue. I really tell people it's a person issue, people issue first. Because even if you have a lot of property, you can hold it in such a way, and we could talk about this later, you can hold it in such a way that it will pass outside of probate. Right. So you can avoid the court, but you can't avoid the court for appointing a minor guardian. The only way you can do that is in a will. So I can have $10 million and have it arranged in a trust that will avoid probate. Right. But if I have a child, I still need to have a will, because I have to say, court, this is where I want my child to go, who I want them to watch over them. So that's really the biggest thing we try to talk to people about is, after death, you have to worry about your children. Right. But also we try to say, before we go right to death, you got to have planning for your life. Because when people think of estate planning, they automatically think of death, right? So what happens after I'm gone? Well, as estate planning attorneys, we say, hold up, let's not jump to that. What happens while you're alive? Right. How many times do we know someone has dementia, maybe some special needs, someone maybe they're getting older and they're just not confident or comfortable taking care of their own affairs, managing, finances? That's still part of estate planning. Right. That's actually a biggest part of our estate planning, is doing power of attorneys, which handles your financial matters, right, and also advanced directives. Now, especially with COVID, how do you want to be treated? If you go to the hospital, do you want to be on a ventilator? If you're unconscious, do you want to have your life supported? That's part of estate planning. So when people say I don't have a lot of property, you say, well, hold up. Do you have any property at all? Yeah, I got a bank account, car, whatever. Okay, house. Okay, you need to do estate planning, because you have to say what happens to that if you're alive and you start to get Alzheimer's. Do you need someone to step in? Right. If God forbid, in a car accident, I do a lot of brain injury patients. So a lot of people that are, people think of special needs of people that were born special, right? So they think of, okay, you're born with, say, autistic. That's a special needs person. They think Special Olympics, and they have a vision in their head of what special needs is. Right. So many people that I deal with were just living their life and had something happen to them: stroke, traumatic brain injury, or like a head injury, shotgun, something that happened when they were, grown, and now their life has completely changed. Spinal injury, you get paralyzed, right? All this stuff, estate planning, right? And you're still alive, but you better believe those things are critical for them long before they pass away. So it's a lot broader than people think.
Right. I was going to say that is huge that you say, you're planning for your life. Just like you said, when you think about estate planning, people think death, but you're planning for your life. And especially during this time of pandemic, we have people who are long haulers, who now have things that have happened to them as a result of being exposed to the virus. And now their way of life has changed. And now they have to talk about those hard things, like you said, those advanced directives. What are we going to do? Are we going to do a DNR, do not resuscitate? What are some things that you want to do? And I think that's where that hard part, like you were talking about earlier, comes in. People don't want to have those conversations, but now we're being forced to have those conversations, like you said, and seeing that uptick of people coming, because now they're like, oh my goodness, what if something happens to me? What are we going to do? Or what are we going to do as a result of that? How are we going to address our quality of life? And so that's huge that you say that. And I just want to make sure that people are listening and are clear on that you are planning for your life, not just for your passing. It's a combination of both. So kind of talk me through the process. Is it a long process of, you know, because I guess when people think about leaving their things, is it this big thesis that they feel like they have to write about? Uh-oh. Okay, we're back. We had a little minor hiccup there. We lost Keith for a minute, but he's back. So we were in the middle of talking about, you know, the process for estate planning. You know, I was asking if it's a long process, like, you know, people think they have to write this whole thesis or this book. Is it more of a questionnaire, or is it more of like a narrative of the things that you want done? Or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, you know, it's a good question to ask, because the honest answer is it's going to depend on which estate planning attorney you go to. I have a certain way I work, and I've kind of worked with systems for me. So I like things with technology. I have a portal. I send someone a questionnaire beforehand that's through the portal. Back in the day, I had a paper questionnaire, but I found that people wouldn't return it when they came. So a lot of times we had to kind of spend the interview, you know, the consultation with me doing an interview saying, well, how many kids do you have? What assets? You know, and I'm wasting the interview trying to get basic information. Right. So then I moved to doing it electronically. So when I have them book their own stuff on the calendar, and once they book, I send them the questionnaire electronically. So when I get it back, I'm kind of reading the questionnaire before they even meet with me and forming my questions. So when we meet, it's usually about half an hour to an hour, and I'm really saying, okay, let's look at what you gave me and start a conversation, kind of just like we are now. Like, tell me what your concerns are. I see you have here, you know, your second marriage between the two of you. You have different children. How do you want to treat them? So I can kind of dive into things. And then once we go through that, I kind of, you know, always have to say, do you understand how things work? What passes by a will? What doesn't? Kind of give them some technical things. But I really want to hear from them, what is their thought pattern? Am I someone who's trying to take care of my spouse first and then my kids? Am I worried about my kids and my spouse can, you know, take care of his or herself? You know, hey, I made this money and I'm trying to spend all of it with me. And, you know, if I give anything I give you, whether it's $10 or $1,000 is a bonus. You know, people have different ideas of how they want things to happen. So my role is really to just pull it out of them, because I'm going to tell them what I suggest, right? But I'm not going to tell them what to do. Right. So if they ask me, or if I see them kind of say, you know what, that's a little bit out of the ordinary, tell me why. But if they say this is really what I want, I'm like, okay, I'm here to kind of make sure the paperwork says whatever you want, which makes it a little bit more, it lasts longer than they want sometimes, because I think a lot of times they do want that, well, just give me a document with some names on it. And I said, no, because, you know, it's not one size fits all. Right. And the same document for one person can cause damage versus another person. And I always give the kind of the quick thing is, I say, are you a Brady Bunch or are you the Cosbys? Right. Right. So the Cosbys are two parents with all the kids are the same for the same two parents. So if you leave money from one parent to the other with a simple will, our husband leaves it to wife. Right. All those kids are going to get that money presumably after mom passes, right? Because they're all in the same space. Brady Bunch. You got Mike Brady, Carol Brady. They got two separate sets of kids. Right. If Mike Brady leaves it to Carol Brady, and Carol Brady leaves it to her kids, or Mike's kids didn't get anything. Wow. And people say, oh, okay, I didn't think about that, right? So they're living together while everyone's alive, they're automatically functioning as one unit. But once you pass, the law says we go by bloodlines and adoption. Gotcha. So it starts changing things. And so people, once they find out the technical way things work, that's when they start to say, oh, let me dive into this a little further. Right. So it winds up taking a little bit longer, because most people are in what we call blended family. So the standard nuclear family, the Cosbys, that's actually not the majority of families nowadays. People have remarried a lot, so you have a lot of blended families. So I would say 60 to 70% of people should not be doing anything simple, just from the structure of how their life is. So even though they're coming in and saying, I want something simple, I explain to them, no, you really don't. Wow. Because if you do something simple, you're going to leave someone out. And
Yeah, and
so
that
once
makes
I
sense. I
explained
didn't
that
even
to
think of
them,
that. I didn't even
yes,
think of that because you would think that, when you were talking about the Brady's and you were talking about, if Mike left it to Carol and then Carol left it down to her kids, that's true. His kids get left out, which because you automatically would assume, well, they were his kids and this was, so doesn't he automatically? And just like you said, we make a lot of assumptions.
right,
And just like you said, the family dynamic has changed so much in that we have same-sex marriages, we have blended families, we have families that where they have guardianship and all kinds of things. And so it gets real complicated. And so, yeah, you definitely want to have somebody to help ask those questions and sort out and help you to sort out things, as you're going along, because there may be those things that you overlook. So, that right there, speaks to the importance of having an estate planner because we don't know everything. We don't want to just go to the store and get a living will packet from, Office Depot or anywhere else and just, say,
right,
well, I'm just going to fill this out and just take it to the court and file it. You want to have somebody who will be able to ask those questions because those are not the things
yeah,
that we readily think of. So I mean, I definitely see that as being an issue. And so talk to me a little bit about the difference between like when you do the estate planning, is it your permanent will or is it a living will, or is it a combination of both?
okay, okay. Well, that's a good question because I don't know why the legislature calls it a living will because it's confusing to everybody, and then we wind up as lawyers having to explain. Okay, a will, when we say a will, that's after you die.
Okay.
It only takes effect after you die. You can make as many as you want. You're not locked into. So if I make a will in 2021 in May, and I decide, oh, July, I want to add something or change something, I can make another one in July. I can keep making new ones. You just can't make a new one after you die because that's when it gets. That's the last one. So when you go to probate, they're like, what's the last one? He had 13. All right, give me the last one, right?
Right.
So
Right.
you can make as many as you want until you die, or until you become incompetent. That's the other thing people don't think. Until you become incompetent. So even if you're alive, right, you start to get to the point where you have Alzheimer's or some brain injury, you might lose the opportunity to update your will. So even though you in your mind say, well, I can always make one now and I'll change it later, some people don't get the opportunity to change it later.
Right.
So we always caution against that. But a will is after you pass away, and then you go to probate.
Right.
A living will, the reason why they put the word living on it is it happens while you're alive, but it's not a will. Okay, it's really what should have been called a advanced. And what it is when you say, if I'm in this particular situation where I'm not able to express my desires for what my healthcare will be, I'm going to tell you what my preferences are.
Gotcha.
So because you're stating your preferences, they kind of equated it to a will, but it's not a will.
Gotcha.
So a will is related to probate court, and this is not related to probate court. It's just a document that people will recognize, the hospitals will recognize, medical facilities will recognize, but it's not a will. So as lawyers, we call it an advance directive. And then in Georgia in particular, we have a form where we take what used to be called a healthcare power of attorney, because there's two aspects of your healthcare. There's where you make your wishes known, or do everything you can to extend my life, or vice versa, don't extend my life, just let me go. That's your advance directive, medical directive piece. And then there's a healthcare power of attorney where you say, I want so-and-so, my spouse, my mother, brother, friend to be an agent for me in case I can't do it. That's healthcare power of attorney aspect. So that both sides of that attorney aspect and the preference are what we call an advance directive now. Yeah. So we don't actually use the word, you actually can't in Georgia make a living will anymore. So we don't even use that in our state of Georgia. Other states, you can make what's called a living will. They shouldn't call it that because it's confusing, but you can make one. We can't even make one. We have to make an advance directive, which will combine both aspects of that healthcare decision-making process, but it's called an advance directive, and we don't call it a living will anymore in Georgia.
Right, and in that advance directive, you're not putting any other information like the things that you would put in your will. Like, I want to leave my home to this person.
Right, exactly. Your will is your part of your estate. Like I said, the state makes it and says wrap around your property, your your child, your person, whatever, your children that are underneath you. All of that is part of your estate, and that is your will portion. Your advance directive is just about you and your health care. Nothing else. It's not going to deal with property of your minor children. It's not going to deal with your spouse and, you know, some aspect of prenup or post-nup or nothing. It just
Right.
you.
Because I think that's what people were thinking. I think people would, when they were thinking living will, were just saying, okay, I'll put everything in this living will. And should I, you know, should I pass, you know, prior to making an official will that this becomes my standing will now that, you know, because that was my living and it just turns into the permanent when I pass.
Yeah, no, yeah. There's only one will that you can make, and you have to have certain formalities. You have to have it in writing, and so you can't scribble something on a napkin in the state of Georgia.
Wow.
In North Carolina, you can scribble something on a napkin, a holographic will. Well, like I said, it's very state specific, right? So in Georgia, you have to type the thing up. You have to have 2 witnesses. And they cannot be someone who's, you know, getting something under your will, right? So you shouldn't, if I'm getting something under my, you know, my mother's will, I shouldn't be the witness to it because it's going to look like I'm some funny business, right? I'm witnessing a will that I'm getting something. So you have some rules about who could serve as a witness. It does not actually have to be notarized. So people don't realize that a will does not have to be notarized. It just has to be witnessed by 2 people over the age of 14. Other states have to be over the age of 18. So states have their different age limits and requirements of witnesses and things. So you have your 2 witnesses. That's a will. Because it's not notarized, is that if you don't have there's another form we use called self-proving affidavit. So you have your will, and then we have another form that says, I, as a notary, am verifying that the person who made the will and the witnesses came and everything was done okay, and then that's notarized. That self-proving affidavit is notarized. And we say keep it with the will. If you don't have a self-proving affidavit, when the person passes away, whether it could be, you know, 3 months later or 10 years, 15, 20, the witnesses of that will have to come to court. And they say, well, was this done right on that day? So they could be dead, they could be unavailable, they could, you know, be unable to be found. So you always want to have that self-proving affidavit which says everything was done okay. So as long as you have that affidavit, the court says, okay, we don't need to bring anybody to the court to prove the will because the self-proving affidavit is doing that function for us. So whenever that's another thing we see when people do their own will at LegalZoom. They're like, okay, I went on there and did my own will. I found something on the internet, and they got a witness. And they didn't know they were supposed to have a self-proven affidavit. So that person passes away, and then you're 12 years later, you're trying to find witnesses, and hopefully it was someone they were still in contact with and that's still alive, because if you can't find the witnesses, then you have to try to fall back on someone verifying the signature of the person. And if you can't do that, you can't admit the will. So you definitely have to go through some procedural things with a will that you don't have to do with other documents.
Yeah. Well, see, and that right there, I'm sitting here like my mouth hung open, like, what? Yeah, because that's a lot. There's a lot. It's a process. It is a process, and I think that's the thing. And I think that's where the anxiety comes in. I'm sorry, honey. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I want to make sure I mention this piece because this is the part that really blows. We always hear the phrase, and you probably hear it, you know, if you don't have a plan, the government has one for you. So people hear, if you've ever heard that with, you know, with not having a will. So some people understand what that means and some people don't. We have what's called intestate rules. Every state has it. So remember I said every state is different with their rulemaking. Yes. They're different in the details, but we all have the same structure. All the states have the same structure. So if you have a will, it will admit it to will for probate court and say, if everything was done correctly with the witnessing and everything, we'll follow the will. If you don't have a will, meaning you never made one or you couldn't meet the standard, your witnessing wasn't right or whatever, you are what's called intestate. So the state has rules of, okay, if someone dies without a will, we as the state will make this determination for them of where their property will go.
Oh,
Okay, so most of the time they try to go across family lines. So they'll say, okay, did the person have a spouse? Yes. All right, let's start there. If you had a spouse, do you have any children? No. Spouse and no children, spouse gets 100%. That's most states. Georgia's that way. If you have a spouse and one child, okay, 50-50. So even if your child was a child that you were estranged from, you didn't talk to, you couldn't stand each other, child, spouse, 50-50. So the state does not care anything about your personal relationships at all. If I have 3 kids and I pass away with 3 kids, I get 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. One could have been taking care of me while I was sick for the last 10 years, and the other one could never have visited me and never called. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. They don't care, okay?
Right.
So when that, but fast forward back to that Brady Bunch example. I mentioned if Carol left something to her children, assume like most people, I think it's about 60 to 70% of people don't have a will.
Right.
So if Carol and Mike, neither one of them had a will, what's the effect? Mike dies without a will. The state says, okay, if you die without a will, Mike, you had 1 spouse, 3 boys. So the spouse, if it was Georgia, would get 1/3, and then the boys would share in the other 2/3. So they would actually get something.
Right.
If he did nothing.
Right.
But if he makes a will that says, I leave everything to Carol,
right,
that's actually where they get disinherited, right? Because it moves over to Carol, and if Carol does something, that does, so it's actually counterintuitive.
She would have to put in her will that she was leaving to the boys and to
exactly. She would have to go see an estate planner to specifically say, include my stepchildren, because they're not automatically included. So it's actually sometimes more protection when you don't have a will than when you have a will, because with blended families, it automatically says, if someone doesn't have a will, we're going to take care of their family by blood. But if you do a will, people, like I said, they come in and they say, I'll just give it to my spouse and then to my children. Well, that could cause a problem. So I always, when I mention that, they're like, oh, okay. And you know, if Mike and Carol don't, I'm gonna give you the other scenario that blows their mind. You ready for this one?
I'm ready.
Mike has a will, says give it to Carol. Dies, gives it to Carol. Carol, she's still looking fine, right? She's looking cutie. So Carol gets remarried. And she, with her new husband, makes a will that says, to my spouse and children. She gets another simple will, but she updates it for her new marriage. Well, what happens? If she passes away before that husband, her stuff goes to the new husband. Neither the boys, Mike's boys, or Carol, girl, none of the 6 kids get anything. Right? Because Mike's stuff went to Carol, Carol's stuff went to the new husband, and his kids got it. Or his, you know, brothers, sisters, or parents, or whatever you had, if they have kids together. So it's crazy, people's property that you think is going to go to your kids. Mike thinks, oh, my son's going to get some of this.
Right.
You have a will that you think you're doing the right thing. Let me just go make a simple will. And you disinherited not only your children, but Mike, if Carol did the same thing, she disinherited her children. So none of the Brady kids got anything.
Right. And I guess that's where we see a lot of the dissension and a lot of the feuding between families, because people are saying, well, I was his child. Why didn't I get anything? Why did his wife get it and I didn't get anything? We hear that a lot, especially in blended families. The new wife gets everything, or the new husband gets everything, and then their blood children get nothing.
Right.
We didn't even think about that. Oh my God, I'm glad you brought that up. That's important stuff. I hope you all are listening to this, because I'm like, what?
And I'm gonna get deeper for you. I'm gonna get deeper for you, Kim. I'm gonna give you another subtlety. Okay. Mike thinks ahead. And Mike's like, he heard this podcast and he's like, whoa, I ain't doing that, right? So Mike goes and talks to an estate planner and he's like, okay, I want Carol to be taken care of, but I also want to make sure that when she passes away, my boys get my property. Not the girls, even though I love them, I'm gonna make sure my boys get my property, right? So he goes and sets up where he has something that says, I'm going to create a trust that will put money into the trust for Carol's life. And then when Carol passes away, to the boys. So he's feeling good, right? He's like, okay, I took care of my kids. My affairs are in order. What's the problem? He said, I put this money into trust for my wife as long as she lives. Right. So now the boys have to wait until she dies.
Right.
Right. So say she's 45. They're both in their mid 40s when he passes.
Right.
And the boys are, say, 18. So now they have to wait, say she lives till she's 87. Right. They have to wait 42 years to get their inheritance. So he took care of his affairs, right? But he didn't think of the practical. So now they have to wait for their stepmom to die. And now that affects the family dynamic. Maybe, if he left some money direct, maybe an insurance policy or something, gave them something day one after he passes, they could feel more comfortable about waiting for the remaining estate.
Right.
But if they don't get anything at all, they may pass away before she does. Right? Because if she lives until her mid 80s,
my grandma lives to 105.
Right, exactly. She lives to 100, like Queen Elizabeth. She's still kicking at 96, right? And he's still not king, right? The Prince Charles is still not. He's still not king, right? He's like 70-something years old. So you got to think of the logistics of things. So that's where I know this good on paper, but let's talk about the practical, especially in a blended family. Because, like I said, Cosby's Brady Bunch.
Right.
I might wait for Claire Huxtable and hope that she lives as long as she's possible. If I'm Malcolm Jamal Warner, if I'm what his name was, Theo, whatever. I hope my mama lives as long as she can. Right. So I don't care if she lives at 95.
Right.
But if she's my stepmom.
Right.
Especially if it's later in life and I didn't have that relationship with her, and she's, getting my dad's money for 50 years, and I don't get a thing. Right. That causes a big problem.
Yeah.
So people, this is a very detailed thing. That's why I said you have to think through this process. Like I start sitting down talking to people and say, okay, now tell me what you want to happen. I want to take care of my spouse and kids. Okay, how do you want to do that? Well, I'm just leave everything to my spouse and she'll take care. Whoa. You give everything to her, and suppose she has a car accident and she didn't have a will. That stuff's going to her kids, and your kids aren't getting anything. Oh, wait a minute, hold up. But no, she said she would. Yeah, she said she would if she's alive.
Right.
But she can't guarantee you how long she's gonna live. But she gonna guarantee she doesn't get Alzheimer's. So she might love them to death. She gets Alzheimer's at a nursing home. That nursing home will look at that asset and say, oh, you got $300,000 of assets? Help, pay for your care. And she's spending down assets on her health care that you meant to go to your children. So you got to think through so many issues. That's why the elder law, I say as I'm estate planning and elder law attorney, part of the elder law is that long-term care, because we have statistics that say, I think it was within the last year and a half, about 70% of people spend down their life savings, because those medical bills, when people have retirement and they have their 401k and savings, they presume that they're going to have that money on a healthy basis, right? So that I can plan out how I spend. But if we're a couple and one of the couple has a health problem, now if that money goes towards that issue, now that's a draining on the retirement savings. If that person passes away, now you have the remaining spouse who has a lot less money than he or she thought, because I anticipated I'm going to have this money to last me till I'm 90, but now we had to spend so much on, my wife's care, and she passed from cancer. Now she had Alzheimer's. We had to put her in, get home attendants and people to come in to help me take care of her. I'm spending money. Wow. So that's part of the elder law. That's part of the estate planning, the life part of it. And that's where we as the Black community need to really start talking about that topic, because two things. Number one, who takes care of people in our community? More likely than not, the woman, right? So the daughters, the mothers and daughters. So the females, they're doing the caregiving. So that means a lot of times they have to leave their job or care while they're working. Right. And that affects their ability to make money for themselves. And then once, they take care of someone, they pass away, they might find themselves in a position where they are, not in a we physically well, because that wears you out taking care of somebody.
Right.
I may have had to leave my job, or maybe had to kind of go part-time or something to take care of mom or daddy or whoever. So it affects us. We have to really talk about how we do caregiving. Yes, siblings, sit down and have a family meeting. Hey, there's 3 of us. Kim can't be the only one taking care of mama. All of us got to pitch in. How are we going to do this? She's going to get burnt out, or she's not be able to do it. She got her family home. She got to home, kids and whatever. You got to have all these kind of discussions. It's not just about passing money at death. You got a whole lot of life discussions.
Oh my goodness! Like you said, and that's just because it's a huge web just in what you talked about. And I think about people who even were married and then they just decided to separate because and then financially I'm not paying for the divorce, so I'm not paying for it either. So we're just gonna live apart. What happens in those situations? So just in talking about what you're talking about, it just seems like it's a whole web of complexities that it can be. Like you said, especially when you start talking about blended families and all those things. My mind is blown right now.
and like I said, we do that kind of thing where, we do 2 kinds of things. We do the marriage that never becomes a divorce, right? So we live in a completely different states for 20 years, right. But someone dies, you still a spouse. Oh no, but they didn't live as spouse. Statute says spouse gets this, right? So that's the way it goes. The flip side of that is people living together, wifey, you my husband, my boo thing. You never get the paperwork done.
Right.
I had one situation that was really sad. A woman, she was an only child of only children. Okay. So she wound up going to the doctor or something, and she, a little problem here or there, went to the doctor, found a big problem. 3 weeks later, she had passed away from this illness. Super quick. Had a live-in fiance. They didn't get a chance to get married yet. When she passed, he wasn't the spouse. So she had a house and money and everything else. He couldn't get access to. So he came to me like, I want to probate my fiance's estate. And I'm like, okay, well, you weren't married yet. So I could get you appointed if she didn't have a will. I was like, I could get you appointed as administrator. But since she didn't have a will leaving you anything, the statute's going to say, does she have any, spouse? No. Does she have any children? No. Go up, find the parents. They passed away. Go find, the uncles and aunts. And it would have been like some far-reaching, relative that she didn't really have any
connection
thing to do with. So he couldn't get anything from her under the statute because he just didn't get a chance to get married to her yet. And that's the kind of thing that we have happen to us because we have to understand there are certain rights that come with being a spouse. Automatic under state planning, we have 401ks. If you have a 401k through your employer, it's what's called an ERISA qualified plan. ERISA says spousal protection. The spouse is automatically the primary beneficiary unless the spouse exclaims. So being married to someone brings a lot of financial rights with it. And like I said, intestate, you passed away, you have a spouse, that person is guaranteed a minimum 1/3. Doesn't matter whether you got a law, you could be fighting left and right. Your spouse, you get interest. You not a spouse, you lock it out.
And that's important.
So it's something we need to understand how the rules work.
Yeah, because it's like you're saying, it's just a matter of, there are a whole lot of things that we accept socially, but legally, it causes a problem. We can all say that, oh, but you've been with that person for 25 years. You're entitled to that. Just like you said, if you don't have that piece of paper that says so, or you don't have any directives, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So this is a hugely, hugely important conversation that we need to be having, especially during this time, but even outside of this space. We're talking about estate planning in the now because this is what's happening right now. But 10 years from now, it's still going to be the same situation. It's going to be the same questions that are going to be asked. Before this pandemic hit, it was the same questions that needed to be asked. And people need to really, stop and consider all the scenarios. I would have never thought through all this. I would have said, okay, I got 75 pairs of shoes. I'm going to leave them to my best friend. And I got I got 1,000 necklaces in one neck. I'm going to leave that to my daughter. And I would have taken the simple route and just saying, okay, I've got all of my things put to the side. But I would have never thought about the whole aspect of spouse and what you think of spouse, but and children and stepchildren and all of these things. Those dynamics, don't really come to people's thoughts. We just think, we want to do that. I love that you talk about the fact that estate planning encompasses how we live. How we're living is going to be reflective of how our things are going to be dispersed and how we're going to be treated. So, it's something. There's a circling pattern that comes around. It's going to come around. We're born. We have things that are going to happen. How is it going to end? What are we going to look like in the end? What are we going to look like on paper in the end? And it's like you said, sometimes it could be a morbid thought. But look at the mess that you can leave if you don't. Right. We have to consider those things. We have to consider, what are we leaving behind? Are we leaving a legacy behind, or are we leaving a bunch of mess behind for somebody else to be responsible for cleaning up? Right. So like I said, I hope that people have heard and really, taken heed to the importance of estate planning, the importance of talking about how you're living, especially in this season where people are passing away at alarmingly young rates. People who are thinking that they have their whole life to live, and next thing you know, we're hearing that people are passing at 45, 50. Things like this are happening, and people are not taking into consideration that, we're not going to be here forever. There's all kinds of diseases. There are pandemics. There are things that can come and take our lives before we want them to. A lot of health issues, things like that, are really prevalent now, and people need to take a hard look at what's necessary to do in order to prepare. And so I just, I'm floored. And I'm also glad that you're here, because I want people to make sure that they get in contact with you and to get in contact with estate planners in their area, so that they know what to do and how to navigate in this space. So, I thank you for bringing that information to us. Before I get into your now, or what you're doing in your now, are there any other words that you want to leave for those who are listening regarding estate planning? I don't want to miss anything.
Yeah, it is just, and we didn't really get to probate. I want people to understand just how this system is set up. Probate, when people think of probate, they think of it as something you have to use the court to get property to the family, right? So if I have a will, I leave like I mentioned, Carol Brady, you take the thing to the court. Understand this first. Probate is designed for the creditors, right? So someone dies, you owe, you got your mortgage, you got your credit cards, maybe you had some hospital bills, they got to organize all those bills.
Right.
Right. So whether you have a will or you don't, so whether you have a will or you don't, when you're going to go through probate court. So I want to make that clear. Probate court is for whether you have a will or whether you don't. And either way, whether it's an administrator, who, when you don't have a will, they call it an administrator. If you have a will, they call it an executor. Either way, that person is going to be responsible for gathering all your assets and telling the court, this is all the assets the person has. And then also telling the court, this is all the debt, all the credit. You got to put a notice in the paper. Creditors will start sending notices. Hey, this person owes me something. You check the person's mail, make sure you see what the bills are, and you have to pay the creditors first, right? So even if I have a will that says I leave everything to my spouse, if I had 100,000 cash and I had 150,000 of creditors, guess what? That will is not passing anything, because that 150,000 is going to swallow up that 100.
Right.
Your will says leave everything to the spouse, but there's nothing left.
Right.
All right. So part of estate planning that we talk to people about is we want to talk to you about how you have structures that avoid going to probate in the first place, because you can arrange things with joint ownership or trust and other things that will avoid having that exposure to that process. So I want to make sure we hit that. So we have to worry about how we design things and will and what we have or not, and how we set that up. But even if we set that up correctly, if we put it in the wrong way or own things in the wrong way, we risk exposing them where creditors can come in. And creditors also includes, I gotta say, the lawyers, the accountants, we got court fee, is part of the administrative piece.
Right.
There's a lot of money that goes to us too. So, even though it's not my self-interest, I'm gonna tell you, all right, you want to avoid trying to go through that process if possible. So a lot of what we want to do is think ahead and try to plan. That's that planning part. You got to really know every single step. How is money going to pass? Kind of map it out. This is the dollar. I have it going from this life insurance policy. Does it go? Oh, I put my son in this life insurance policy. He's only 12. He can't get that policy directly because he's a minor. Now we have to do whether we have to create a trust to hold it for him or something. You got to think through all the details. How does this money pass? So it's not just enough to have the insurance. You got to know how you want that to pass if it goes through that. So there's a lot of logistical things.
My goodness.
That is in the details.
Like I said, mind blown. My little bun on here is vibrating. Wow. That is a lot of information, but it's necessary. It's necessary. That's why I'm grateful for platforms like this so that we can talk about these things, because there's so much that we make assumptions about or that we think we know about. And there's a whole nother set of things that we need to know. And so, it's important that we know the terminology. That's why I'm so glad that we spoke about living wills and how that's just not something that is existing in the state of Georgia, and that we learned that word advanced directive. It's important for us to know the vocabulary, because we can't talk about things if we don't know enough about them or aren't given the terms to use so that we're sure that we're talking about the same thing.
Right.
So I think it's important that we do that. I think this was an important and timely conversation to have, because so many of us are ill prepared and we just don't know what's coming down the pipe. And if we should happen to get ill as a result of this pandemic, or if we've experienced, things that have happened to us as a result of it, and it may have caused our life expectancy not to go as long as we thought, we have to take these things into consideration so that we're not left, with the horrible, I hate to say, quote unquote, state of affairs. We need to make sure that we're planning and we're organizing for our future. And, I'm grateful that there are, people like yourself that have taken it on, not just as a profession, but as a ministry, to make sure that we're caring for and taking care of each other and asking the questions and answering the hard questions that we need to answer so that we're not stuck. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing this information to us and keeping us informed. So again, as I say at the end of all of my shows, when we talk about, well, like I said, we're going to talk about what are some things that you do to live in this now. How are you navigating in this space right now? I don't know if you were able to. Yes, yeah. I wasn't sure if you were able to hear me. You froze just a little bit, but I was asking you, what are you doing in this now?
Well, in this now, I told you I had when this first started, and it's been a blessing for me in a couple ways. Spiritually, I started having that same, like I said, the same feelings of, my mortality. I didn't know where this was going. So I started getting my word, right? Before it was just, I was a churchgoer, but I didn't really, unfortunately, really get into my word and read. Let me go have quiet time. Let me go say, Lord, what do you want from me? And, am I doing the right thing? Guide me, So I started having conversations and saying, well, I might see you in person soon, so let me just start prepping. And it's changed a lot for me. And it's a blessing to unfortunately took that kind of anxiety and fear to get there. But, once you get there, you're just thankful that you got there, right? And then physically, you mentioned, I'm a little smaller than I was before, because once I heard what the this pandemic does to people. And I said, you know what? I need to get myself in as physically fit a shape as I can to give myself the best chance. So I started walking, changing my diet. So I've dropped about 60 pounds.
Hey now,
I want to get another 60, but you get that plateau, so it's harder to get that second 60. But I try to at least, not go back, right? So but I, got there walking, but the weather's starting to really get nice now. Go back to my routine of walking. So those are the two things: is just getting myself physically fit, and then of course spiritually fit, and just say, hey. And even when I practice now, it's kind of like more formal. When I got back to my word, I said, Lord, this is your practice. I said, you have me, my name's on it, but this is your practice. So every time I meet with someone, before I talk to them, I pray and I said, Lord, help me say the right things. Help me to listen, understand, but let me say what you want me to say, and I incorporate him into everything I'm doing. So that's been a big change for me.
That's wonderful, and that's important. It's important for us to see how people are navigating in this space, because there's still uncertainty for some of us, and for some of us, it has expanded our spiritual journey. It has expanded our wealth, in our wellness journey. What are the things that we're doing to be in the best position, like you said, to grow? And I think that a beautiful thing that you're doing in this whole cycle of people who are still existing in a space of fear, some people who are still learning and growing things. There are those who have gotten to a space of growth and are reaching back and helping others. And I feel that you fall in that category as well. There may be some overlap in things that you're learning, because we're still always learning and growing, but it's wonderful when we get to a space where we can reach back and help others. And I think that you do a beautiful job of doing that. So I am just so excited, like I said, to have you here. I'm so grateful that you come on and share the information that you shared, because it's something that we all have to face at some point, and we hope later rather than sooner, but while we are still, in our right mind and have strength in our bodies, we should be seeking to get these questions answered. So that way we're leaving those behind a legacy of wealth and wisdom and knowledge. Those are things that are going to be important. We want to make sure that we pass those things on, and that, we can say that when that person passes, that, they made sure that they crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's. And I want to make sure that I do the same thing, so that I'm in a position like my relative left me in. That's what's important. So the best thing that we can do now is just tell people how they can get in contact with you, because I'm sure they have so many more questions, and I'm sure there's so much more. We could have gone on a whole nother hour talking about the different dynamics, but tell people how they can get in contact with you.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate that. My website, I go by the Georgia Elder Lawyer. So it's the GeorgiaElderLawyer.com, the GeorgiaElderLawyer.com. And then my office number is 770-817-7636. The 770-817-7636, the GeorgiaElderLawyer.com.
Now, is it Georgia spelled out, or is it just GA?
The full Georgia Elder Lawyer, the whole thing spelled out.
Okay, so that is the GeorgiaElderLawyer.com, and his phone number again is 770-817-7636. And definitely when we post the show, we'll make sure that we have that in the description, so people will have an opportunity to get in contact with you. So again, Keith, I thank you for being here. I thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and for helping us to prepare for the future. Okay.
It's been wonderful. Thank you for having me. You're a wonderful host. It was as wonderful as I thought it would be, because you're amazing, and I'm so proud. I'm proud of you.
Thank you so much.
And being so,
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate our friendship. It has been years and years and years, and and I remember I remember you introducing me to my former church home, and there was a lot that I did there as a result. And so I appreciate the friendship, and it's wonderful to have people who are in my circle who have so much knowledge, and I can go back and tap into, and that we pick up where we left off. So that's the blessing. So again, I thank you for being here. Thank you so much. Okay. And so that will do it for another episode of the How Now podcast, where we talk about how to live in the now. And until I see you all the next time, I say